I've had a lot of requests for a follow-up video on the 12-volt air conditioner installed. So just going to do a quick review and then talk a little bit about energy consumption and show you underneath the van where I've got the outdoor unit and fan and compressor and everything mounted. So I've installed this one in my overhead cabinet to keep a nice clean look here. As you can see, both the high and low pressure lines go back into the side of the body and then go down the C-pillar. It was a little bit of a pain. I kind of had to cut out the top of the C-pillar a little bit, just the opening, so that they would fit in, and then of course put edge guard and stuff so there wouldn't be any abrasion on the high and low pressure lines. And there's a left and a right side of the C-pillar. So my pipes are run on the left side here. There's plenty of room. Actually installed a vapor barrier and stuff too, so that there wouldn't be any condensation. If you got any questions about that kind of stuff, a lot of thought went into not leaving condensation inside the C-pillar to build up. I've got a provision for it to leak out if it does, but it turns out I've got a loop of about 4 feet of hose behind the evaporator here, so that actually gives the line quite a bit of time to equalize in temperature, so it didn't get near as much condensation, really any, which is unexpected and great. I've also insulated it pretty well with the kind of neoprene pipe insulation. So the unit itself, this was I think $600 on eBay. You can get them for a little bit more expensive on Amazon. They're pretty much ubiquitous and they're really similar to each other. The outdoor units all look identical, where the indoor units vary in size. But it's got 6 fan speeds, it comes with a remote, and it's been a pretty robust unit. We've got hundreds of hours on this thing, using it in Florida here in full summer. I mean, it gets well over 100 degrees in the van and extreme humidity, so it cools off the van really well. I did want to talk about that a little bit. I'm in a 144, so a fairly short wheelbase Sprinter. We have insulated window covers not installed right now. When those are on, and if it's not hot outside, you can cool the whole van no problem. Mine is a ex-Amazon van, so it's dark blue-gray. It draws in a lot of heat, so there's a huge temperature gradient between the front and the rear of the van. This is an air conditioner like this is not going to keep the van at 70 degrees on a 100-degree day, period. So running full bore on full cool, it will get the van comfortable though, and it'll certainly cool you off after you come back from a run or an outdoor activity. Standing in front of it, it's really nice. And at night, which was my number one build contention, was I've got to have a cool van to sleep in. I can't sleep when it's hot and sweaty in here, so it blows on you while you're cool. It works beautifully for that. It'll run for 8 hours on my 400 amp hour battery bank roughly, with no solar offset. And that's with the compressor kind of kicking off and on a little bit at night. During the day, the compressor, it never reaches the temperature where the compressor is going to kick off during the day. So if you're building one, keep that in mind. In a hot state, if you're out west, the thing's perfect. It's just to knock down the heat a little bit, but in Florida or another humid location, it's simply going to help with comfort. Another plan I have so I've got a flyover fold-out bed, and it comes out to right here where these landings are. If you haven't seen the other videos on the bed build and stuff, my plan is to put an insulated, like a moving blanket up here, just cut it to size and hang it at night when we're sleeping, and then it'll clip to the bed, just real easy, real removable, rolls up for storage, and that will cut down the area that the air conditioner is cooling by 8 times smaller, so it'll be a lot more energy efficient. That way we're not wasting all that cold air on the rest of the van, and it should help it from cycling as much. Rather, it'll cycle more, but not so quickly in between, so our temperature won't rise and fall 15 degrees and wake us up. So that's a future plan. I'll do another video on that if that comes about. If you have any questions about that, just leave them in the comments. I'll show you an operation here. Like I said, it's got a remote too. We can turn it on by hand. Everything's in Celsius because these are Chinese units. I've seen some videos on these where people said you can only turn the temperature down and the speed up, because they don't realize that once you press speed here, that's up, and now that you've indicated speed on the display, you can now turn it up or down using the up and down arrows. So, and that goes the same for temperature. If I crank the temperature down here, I can also use the speed button to turn it up. I do not have to use the remote, as has been posited in other videos. Now, I'm currently, let's see here, I'm getting in 292 watts of solar right now. It's about 1 p.m. I've got 525 watts on the roof. I never see more than 4 really for any period of time. And right now I'm drawing 37 amps. I'm just blowing out nice cold air. I should also point out, for the clearance at the bottom of the unit, there used to be drains down there. I took those off and routed them out the back. So they now leave out the back of the unit, which bought me a little clearance. I didn't want the overhead console being any lower. And I also added a 4-way T on the drain, which I can use to pour bleach down it, or I plan to eventually install a temporary dehumidifier during times when it's not in use. And this is going to be the drain for the dehumidifier in the van as well. It drains quite a lot of water in the summer, so you do have to watch your slope as to whether or not you've got both drains accessible, or how it's set up. I find that this draws about 800 watts, which is right about what the manufacturer states, which for me is in the near 60 amp range when this thing's on full bore. And I never have any problem with wiring. I've run, the wiring it came with was, I don't know, 10 gauge maybe. It was not as beefy as I wanted it to be, so I ran 6 gauge. I was also extending it, so I ran 6 gauge all the way across under the van. I'll show you that in a minute as well. But if we crank this thing up to max, it's fairly quiet. I don't know how well you can tell in the video, but I'm raising my voice a little bit to talk over it, standing right next to it. This is on full speed. I love the white noise that it creates at night, and you can keep it on constant fan. It's got an eco mode as well, which kind of cranks it down to about 78 degrees or 80 degrees and turns the fan speed down, draws quite a bit less power. So right now on full blast, I'm drawing 43 amps. And my solar offset's 22 amps, so 65 amps is what this thing's drawing right now completely on full bore. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off so that when I go underneath the van, you'll be able to hear me a little better. It's worth noting also, the fan underneath the van is very quiet. If you were camping right next to somebody, you could hear it, but it's not a nuisance. It doesn't sound like a generator out there. It's just a fan where not much louder than a max fan if you have one. So it's pretty great. I'm gonna head outside and show you what I've done outside as well. As far as the electrical is concerned, I've got 6 gauge going right here to my kind of partially homemade circuit box there, and it goes down through. There's a hole in the underside of the van with a knockout plug, and I've installed grommets in it to be a pass-through for all the electrical that's leaving. So that's all for the wiring side. Underneath the van, I've made some aluminum frames. I just used aluminum angle to make a long frame that goes about 4 or 5 feet along the underside of the van here. And then I've mounted everything to that with stainless hardware. So I did kind of a swivel to mount the fan here, which actually allowed me to change the angle wherever I wanted it. I needed it to be nice and close to the van body, but also tucked up enough that I'm not going to be hitting anything. I've had a lot of people ask about debris and things like that, of course, since it's underneath the van. These bulkheads up ahead of me, where the fuel inlet comes in, completely block debris from the front wheel, as well as the mud flap up there. So I don't get anything kicked up on it. It's quite protected up here, and it's actually about the same height as the fuel tank, so I don't worry about it. I'm also not out west in a 4-wheel drive Sprinter bouncing this thing up and down mountain passes, so that may be a design problem. You want to build it a little more robustly or whatever, but this one is very solid. It's a electric compressor. You can see my Freon lines kind of go up here, and I've got them passing through that knockout I was talking about, and it works really nicely, and through that as well as the drain for the condensation on the evaporator. Just comes out, and the electrical comes out the back of the compressor, and I've got it run with the factory wiring. I used a really good wire loom. This bundle of wire right here is actually the DC to DC wiring, which I have not run under the fuel tank yet. It's on my list real soon, but it normally looks a lot cleaner. So I ran the lines for the air conditioner up over the top of those brake lines, and they go across, and then they go over the frame rail, so that they're never the low point, so don't get hung up on anything. But everything's run on factory wiring and looks really clean. I've got a couple thousand miles on this setup, and I've had no problems. The compressor's super rigidly mounted. It doesn't transmit a whole lot of vibration into the frame. It's got some shock mounts. If you wanted to, you could have made more shock mounts on this hanging compressor basket here, but I just wanted a nice rigid mount, and it's worked beautifully. Let's see if you can see up here. And the fan and stuff, I haven't picked up any dust. People have asked why I don't install some plastic barriers around over the outdoor unit here, and my contention is that if you put a shroud in front of the fan, you're just creating eddies to slow down the air and places for dust to collect. Having it wide open like this has worked really well for me. And so like I said, no problems here. I will report back if I have any problems in the future, but right now it's been for $600. If you compare it to the other options out there for $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, this is a really clean setup. It's not visible at all. It doesn't take up much space. The only real estate I'm losing is probably if I wanted a gray water tank or something on this side, but I certainly wouldn't trade it for such. If you've got any other questions about this unit or the way I've routed everything, wired it up, anything else, power consumption, more specifics, if you've got questions, just leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them, and I'll report back on here if I have any problems with this setup in the future. Have a good one.